Welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Matt Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Metal Matt. So let's go ahead and get started with this podcast finally. I've been wanting to do this podcast for about a week now, but it's here now, so let's go ahead and do it. First of all, some quick shout outs. First of all, it's Movie Man with Spanky G. Definitely check out that podcast. It's very entertaining, real great, so definitely check it out. And Chucky's Playground is a great place to be. If you haven't signed up yet, definitely sign up because it's a really great place to be. Awesome place to hang out. So, we will go ahead and talk about the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Doing a video on the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I wanted to do this episode last week, but I just got really busy last week. I just did not have any time to record it, and it really sucks because I really wanted to do it last Friday because last Friday they released their new album, so I wanted to kind of release at the same time as that, but unfortunately, it just didn't work out very well. Schedule just didn't work out very well, but I'm here now, and I'm here talking about it now. So let's go ahead and talk about the Red Hot Chili Peppers. The way I first got into Red Hot Chili Peppers was, I've always known about the Red Hot Chili Peppers. They just sort of always been there for me. I've always been aware of them, like. I believe the first time I saw anything Red Hot Chili Peppers related was the Californication video. I remember seeing that when I was like maybe 5, 6 years old. And I really remember that video really standing out to me because it looked exactly like a video game. And that really appealed to me. And then I saw them on The Simpsons, their episode that they did, Krusty Gets Canceled. They get started in the episode, and that was another exposure to the Red Hot Chili Peppers. But I think the album where I really got into Red Hot Chili Peppers, where I really became a fan, was the Stadium Arcadium album. And I think that really made me like a Chili Peppers fan for life. Like that album is really great, and I'll get more into that album later on. But that was really the album that sort of made me a fan of them, and I've been a fan ever since 2006, I'd say. So let's go ahead and start this podcast with their debut album, simply known as the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And this came out in 1984. And that is an interesting thing. Like, a lot of people, they do think that the Red Hot Chili Peppers were mainly like a 90s thing. And they did get like a breakthrough in the 90s, but they've been around for longer than people might think. They've been around since like the early 80s, which is almost kind of weird to think, but, it's true. But yeah, this debut album, I know a lot of people don't really like this record, and I think the band themselves have even gone on record as saying, yeah, they're not really fans of it. But honestly, for me, I actually really like this one. I really like this album. It's certainly not the best Chili Peppers album that's ever been, but I do think that this album does have moments. True Men Don't Kill Coyotes. I really like kind of like the psychedelic kind of vibe it has going for that. Baby Appeal is really good as well. Green Heaven is pretty heavy. It's pretty good. Mommy's Where's Daddy. There's also some really weird things on here that are sort of like a staple of the Red Hot Chili Peppers in the sense that they would often record like really short songs. And not only that, but they're just recording like these really weird, really brief kind of things. Specifically on these first two albums, basically. Like on this one they have You Always Sing the Same, which is just this really fast song. You always sing the same, you always sing the same, you always sing the same, you always sing the same. And like just something like that. It's really weird, but at that time it was almost like a trademark for the Chili Peppers. And then to end the album, you got Grandpappy Do Plenty, which is an instrumental song, which I believe might be the only instrumental that the Chili Peppers have ever done. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure it's the only instrumental one that they have. But yeah, overall, I think this album is really good. Grandpa You Do Plenty, it's a really cool sounding song. It almost seems like, the score to like an action movie or something. It's almost very John Carpenter esque, in my opinion. It just has like these really cool songs. It definitely like it has the Chili Peppers signature sound to it. At least early on. Like you got the funk rock, down, but you also got some psychedelic to it, and you also got some punk and hardcore to it. So it definitely kind of goes in a lot of directions. And I think that might be why people don't really like it, because it is kind of all over the place. But as a debut album, I can honestly forgive it. And I do think that, for me, it works well. I think this album, I think this does have, like, replay value, Like, I really like this album. I'm probably in a minority on that, but personally, I like it. So we're going to be moving on to Freaky Styley. And this was in 1985. And, this album, it's okay. I don't know. I personally, I feel it's a bit of a step down from the first one. I do think that it has better production values than the first one. This was actually produced by George Clinton, who was in Parliament Funkadelic, and he also had a solo career as well. And when you think about it, he does seem like a pretty good fit for the Chili Peppers because, Parliament Funkadelic, it was that funk kind of feel. So yeah, he is kind of a good fit for the Chili Peppers, and I do think that he does good production work on this album. But at the same time, the album honestly is kind of forgettable. I don't really remember too much from it, but the album, it does go in. It's more eclectic than the first one, I'd say. Like, even though the first one had like all these different sounds, I do think that this album, it does sort of experiment a little bit more than the first one did. But this album does have its moments, like there's some good songs on here, like Jungleman is a pretty good like opening track. Hollywood Africa, Catholic Schoolgirl's Role, Yertle the Turtle, which is like an adaptation of a Dr. Seuss story. Just stuff like that. But other than that, for me, it doesn't really have too much replay value. It has its moments, but for me, it's just kind of forgettable, and it's probably one of their weakest albums, in my opinion. And so now we move on to their third album, known as the Uplift Mofo Party Plan. And this was released in 1987. And this was the only studio album to feature all the founding members of the band. And that's Anthony Kiedis, Flea, Hill Sovak, and Jack Irons. And this is probably, out of all like the early Chili Peppers album, it's probably the best one, maybe. Because it does have that Chili Peppers feel, like all the members, I think, really work together great. I think there's had some pretty good chemistry, and it's sort of a shame that this lineup only lasted one official album, because it's pretty good. It does continue on with the funk rock style of their first two albums, but it also features more of a metal kind of vibe. In fact, I would go so far as to say this might be their heaviest album. Like, either that or Mother's Milk would be their heaviest album. I do think that this is a good album. I think it definitely has its moments. I actually do remember, seeing the video for Fight Like a Brave, on the TV. Like, when I was staying, I was staying at a family friend's house one time. Like, I think my mom and my dad were going to like a football game or something like that, and so I had to stay at one of their friends' house overnight. And like, I don't know, like for me, like that, I just could not go to sleep. I don't know why, but I just could not go to sleep. No matter how hard I tried, I just could not sleep. So I decided, you know what? I'll just go ahead. I'll just stay up. like I was like, I don't know how old I was. I had to be like a preteen, maybe like 11, 12. I want to say that's how old I was, but I don't know. But I was maybe a preteen or maybe even a teenager by that point. But I just remember, you know what? I'll just go ahead and stay up because I just cannot sleep. So I decided to go ahead and just play like Big Mother Truckers on PC, just stuff like that, just random computer games. I decided to go and watch VH1 Classic because I was watching VH1 Classic a lot at that time. They used to have a show. I don't know if they still do it, but they used to have a show called 120 Minutes, and it would basically be like an alternative music video block. You know, it was a music video block showing alternative rock videos and stuff like that. And they ended up showing Fly Like a Brave by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And this was the first time I had ever heard like early Chili Peppers because at that point I was only familiar with their new kind of melodic, mellow sound. And so this was sort of a surprise to kind of hear the Chili Peppers sort of like be like this really heavy funk rock kind of band, you know. In the video, it's not really very good, but, you know, like to like 12, 13-year-old me, I thought this was pretty interesting. But yeah, that song is pretty good as well. You know, you got Funky Crime, which is good as well. Backwoods, which is just really heavy. They have a pretty good cover of Suburban Homesick Blues, you know, just songs like that, you know. And I do think this is a good album overall. Sucks that that's the only album that had the original lineup, like the original lineup. But I do think that this is a good album, and if you're gonna pick like any of the Chili Peppers, I guess 80s albums, I suppose I'd go ahead and pick this one because this is a really good album. And so things changed between Uplift, Mofo Party Plan, and the next album. Hilo Slovak ended up dying from a heroin overdose, and Jack Irons wasn't able to cope with that, and he ended up leaving as well. So Chili Peppers were without a guitarist and a drummer. And so they ended up recruiting John Frusciante on guitar and Chad Smith on drums. And this is where we get Mother's Milk, and this was released in 1989. And this was the first album to have what I like to consider the quintessential Chili Peppers lineup. For me, I think their lineup of Kiedis, Flea, Frusciante, and Smith definitely the best lineup out of all the Chili Peppers, and I think it's probably the most famous. I think everyone knows this lineup. I think it's a really good lineup. This album, it's not so good. Like, I don't know, like, you can kind of tell that the band is at odds with its producer, and that's what happened. Like, I think the band, like, the producer wanted to, like, really push the limit in terms of heavy metal guitar riffs, and he wanted to do overdubbing, and so Frusciante and the producer just fought all the time. And honestly, you can kind of tell, you know, because it's sort of disjointed and it's not very good. Commercial wise, it actually did pretty well. It did better than the first three albums. But personally, for me, I don't really think it's that good. It was sort of like the beginning of the Chili Peppers' success. You know, it was sort of like that first step towards the big time. But for me, I don't know. I wasn't really feeling this album all that much personally. But at the same time, I do think that this album, it does have its moments. You know, like they do a really good cover of Higher Ground, which was originally by Stevie Wonder. And I do think that one's pretty good. Knock Me Down, that's pretty good as well. You got Stone Cold Bush, and you got cover of Jimi Hendrix's Fire. Punk Rock Classic, which is a pretty brief song. You know, I like the ones on, you know, Chili Peppers' previous albums. And also has an interpolation of Sweet Child of Mine, which is rather interesting to say the least. But yeah, Mother's Milk, not too much to say about it. Like, it's probably their heaviest album, maybe, but you can tell that the Chili Peppers and the producer were not getting along. It's a bit disjointed because of that. It definitely has its moments, but for me, I don't know, I wasn't really feeling this album. And so we move on to the 90s, and Chili Peppers end up getting a new producer, Rick Rubin, who would stay with them for a while. And we end up getting what very well could be their best album, Blood Sugar Sex Magic. And Blood Sugar Sex Magic probably objectively is their absolute best album. I don't know if I'd necessarily call it my favorite, although it is one of my favorites, but it's probably not my absolute favorite Chili Peppers album, but it is a really good album. I think the Chili Peppers sound really, I think they really found themselves on this album. It's a bit less heavy, I guess you could say. It's still like a heavy album, but it's not like Mother's Milk heavy or Uplift Mofo Party Plan heavy. You know what I mean? It's definitely a bit funky. You know. I do really like this one. I really like this album. It has some of their best songs for sure. It does sort of have a bit of an odd start with The Power of Equality, which I don't really think is that good of a song. But then when Breaking the Girl comes on, which is a really good ballad, I think that's a really good one. That's when the album really picks up, personally. Then you got Funky Monk, Suck My Kiss, I Could Have Lied, which is a great ballad as well. You got Mellowship, Slinky in B Major, The Righteous and the Wicked. And then you got Give It Away, which I think was maybe their big song. Like, it was either or Under the Bridge. Like, both of those were, like, really big songs. And then you got the title track, Blood Sugar Sex Magic, which I think is a really underrated song. That song really doesn't get a lot of attention, but it really should, because it's really good. And then you got Sir Psycho Sexy, which is, like, an 8-minute long song. That's a really good song. And that's how the album should have ended. But it doesn't. Because we end up getting the cover of Robert Johnson's They're Red Hot, which, like, it fits the band, but there really was no reason to end the album with that song. And really, there really wasn't even a reason for it to even be on the album in the first place. It almost kind of feels like filler a little bit, and there are definitely some songs on here that are filler, but I think for the most part, a lot of the songs they're really home runs, I think. And, some of their best songs are on here. Some of their biggest songs, and I do think this is a really great album. Like, if you wanted a place to start with the Chili Peppers, this would probably be the place. Like, it has some great production, great songs, so I definitely recommend checking it out. So, shortly after Blood Sugar Sex Magic, John Frusciante ended up not really being able to cope with the newfound success of the Chili Peppers. Like, they had some success after Mother's Milk, but after Blood Sugar Sex Magic, it got huge. And Frusciante just wasn't able to kind of, like, adjust to the newfound fame, and so he ended up leaving. And so they ended up replacing him with Dave Navarro of Jane's Addiction. And this is where we get One Hot Minute. And, this album, I really don't know how to feel about this album, because on the one hand, I really want to like it. I really do. But on the other hand, it's just not that good. Like Dave Navarro, the addition of him, it really changes a lot of the band's style. Like, it really does kind of change it to a more standard rock alternative. And it really changes it to more psychedelic rock. And I don't think it works in the band's favor. I don't think it's a really good one. It's not really that memorable, personally. And it's a shame because the album actually starts out pretty good. You got Warped and Aeroplane, which are really good. And you got My Friends and Coffee Shop. And you got P, which features Flea on vocals. But shortly after that, it's really where the album just becomes really less interesting as it goes on. And I think the number one problem with the album is that it is just straight boring. It is a boring album. Like, it is a friggin' snooze fest, man. Like, honestly, like I nearly went to sleep while listening to this album, like, 'cause that's how bored I was. I mean, granted, it probably didn't help that I was listening to the album at like 2 a.m. in the morning, but still, like, I just found myself really bored by this album, and it really sucks because I really wanted to like this album because it really does seem like the kind of album that I would enjoy. But I think some of the songs, they do kind of go on for a bit too long. Like, One Hot Minute, the title track, even though I do like the song, it can kind of just go on and on. Especially the end. Oh my god. Like, anybody who's heard that song knows what I'm talking about. The ending just goes on and on and on. God. But yeah, even though it does have its moments, One Hot Minute, it really is disappointing, especially when it came, right after Blood Sugar Sex Magic. So it was definitely, it had some high expectations for sure. It was going to be a tough act to follow, but this one, yeah, I don't even know. Like, I really don't think psychedelic rock metal. I don't think that really fit the Chili Peppers style. So I don't know. It has its moments, but for the most part, One Hot Minute, kind of boring and it sucks. So, and that was released in 1995, by the way. I don't think I mentioned that, but anyway. So we end up going to 1999, and John Frusciante gets welcomed back into the band. Navarro ended up getting fired or leaving. I think it might have been a mix of both. They were going through creative differences after One Hot Minute. So, Californication, releasing Californication, and first album since Blood Sugar Sex Magic to have John Frusciante back on vocals, and it's also a different album for the Chili Peppers as well. Like, it really does kind of change the style a bit. While there's still funk elements in it, it really does change the style to the style that I think we're all a bit familiar with now. It's really more of a melodic, mellow kind of sound, that kind of alternative sound. And I do think that it really fits the Chili Peppers well. There are definitely some people that probably aren't fans of this style that the Chili Peppers do, and I can absolutely understand why. But for me, I do like this one. And I think Californication is a really good album. Honestly, this might be my personal favorite album. I would say it's probably a tie between this and Stadium Arcadium. It's a really good album. And Californication, it really is like the standard California album, you know what I mean? Like, when you listen to this album, you just feel like you're in California. And as someone that's never been to California before, but really wants to go, it's probably the next best thing to being in California, Like, I can picture, like, a teenager or, a young adult, like, listening to this album in, like, an apartment complex or something like that, you know what I mean? In California, like, and while they're like roller skating or skateboarding or something like that, you know what I mean? Like, it really just has like that 90s kind of feel, sort of in the same way that, say, like the first American Pie, you know what I mean? Because American Pie, it really does remind me of like the late 90s, and to an extent the second one, even though that was made in 2001, but whatever. But I really do feel that this has like a really late 90s sound, and I do a California style, and I really like it. It has a really good song, like, you have an intro song like Around the World, which is really good, even though the first, like, the opening riff really reminds me of Budgie's Bread Fan. I think that's the band name, Budgie, or Budgie, or I don't know how. I'm sure it's something like that. Let me check very quickly. Hopefully this won't take very long. Let's see. Just bear with me for a second. Let's see. Budgie, yeah, that's it, Budgie. So yeah, Budgie's Bread Fan. That's what the opening riff really reminds me of. But yeah, it's a really good kind of like funk rock sound. And then you have Scar Tissue, which is a really good ballad, kind of more mellow song. Like, if there's any, like, Chili Peppers single from this album that really kind of lets you know what kind of album you're in for, it's either that or Californication, because both of those songs are just really mellow, really laid back kind of songs, And then you have Other Side and Get on Top, which are really good. Porcelain, I Like Dirt, Right on Time, and Road Trippin'. It's just a really mellow album. Again, like I said, it's something that I could picture like a teenager or like a young adult in their like early 20s listen to in an apartment in California. Like if I was like in my 20s living in California in like the late 90s, this would probably be the record that I would be listening to. It's just a really good album. I really like it for me. And there was also like a lot of people complaining about the production of this album because they felt like it was a bit too loud. It's that Rick Rubin style production where it's just really loud. Having listened to this album, I personally don't see it. And I know that there are similar complaints about Stadium Arcadium, but for me, I really don't hear a problem. I really don't. Like, at times it can be a bit loud, but it's never to the point where it's, like, unbearable to listen to. You know what I mean? Like, I think Death Magnetic by Metallica, which Rubin also produced, I think that one, I can definitely understand why people would say that. It definitely has, like, production problems. I think it can be a bit too loud for its own good. But for me, on Californication, Stadium Arcadium, and the other Rubin-produced Chili Peppers albums, I don't really hear that big a problem with it. So, yeah, for me, Californication, really great album by the Chili Peppers. I really like this album. So, this is one album I definitely recommend. And so we move on to By the Way, released in 2002. And this album, it does continue their more melodic, mellow kind of sound. But I think that it takes it a bit further on here than on Californication. There's really only one album, only one song on here, which is really like funk rock, and that's maybe the title track. But I do like this album to an extent. I think it's a step down from Californication. I don't think it's as good as Californication, and I think it can be a bit boring for its own good at times. But I do kind of like it to an extent. It definitely has its moments. Like the title track is really good as well. Universally speaking, it's okay. Dosed is okay. The Sapphire song, Can't Stop, Throw Away Your Television, it's actually a really good song. It's pretty underrated. Venice Queen, which ends the album, is really good as well. And yeah, I think some songs on here, I think they do kind of go a bit longer than they need to. And at times they can be just a little bit boring. But for me, I do like this album to an extent. I think it's an okay album. There's really not much to say about it, honestly. It just has a really mellow sound. It just basically, moves on. Like, it's basically doing what Californication did. Almost to the point where it almost feels like a sequel. And I don't know, like, it's just sort of a step down from Californication. So I thought, By the Way, was okay. Just not the best, but not the worst either. And so then we move on to Stadium Arcadium. And this was released in 2006. And what was pretty interesting about this record was that this was a double album. This was a double album. Which was pretty cool on the Chili Peppers part. And it consists of 2 discs, Jupiter and Mars. And personally, I think the Jupiter side is much better, but the Mars album, side also is really good as well. And originally the plan for Stadium Arcadium, they were going to do like they were going to release like 3 albums, like 6 months apart, but they just decided to go ahead and do it as one big album. And personally, I don't know. I feel it would have been better if they had just done the 3 album plan. But for me, I don't think this is that bad of an album at all. If anything, it's actually one of my favorite Chili Peppers album. I mean, I really don't know which one would be my favorite. It's either Californication or Stadium Arcadium. I really don't know. Like, it's a bit of a tough call, honestly. I mean, this album, it really is like the peak of their creative input. You know, like, they were really creative on this one. You know, putting in like 28 songs, I believe. So yeah, they did like a lot. Like, if anybody hated By the Way because it was long, then they're really not going to like this album, because this one is pretty long as well. But I really don't mind that, because I think the songs are really so enjoyable for the most part that they really just go by really fast, you know. I mean, like I said, I think the Jupiter side is a bit stronger. Like, you got some really good songs. You got Danny California, Snow Heyo, the title track, Humpty Bump, She's Only 18, Slow Cheetah, Wet Sand. You got like a really good collection of songs on Jupiter. I think the Mars one is where it kind of starts to slow down a little bit, but it's still pretty good. Like, we start with Desecration Smile, which is probably one of my favorite Chili Peppers songs. I think it's a really good kind of mellow song. Like, and you got Tell Me Baby, Hard to Concentrate, Ready Made, which has a bass riff pretty similar to Jane's Addiction's Mountain Song. So that's rather interesting. And you got If, which is good, Make You Feel Better, which is a bit higher tempo, has a bit more attitude to it, more fast paced, stuff like that. Like, this album really does kind of experiment just a little bit. But yeah, I do think that this album is very good. You got great songs like Danny California, which is probably one of my favorite Chili Peppers songs. Just a really good album for the most part. Like Stadium Arcadium, really creative album for them. I do think that is really good. I really, really like Stadium Arcadium. Probably one of my favorite Chili Peppers albums, my top favorite Chili Peppers albums. I don't know if it would be like my top Chili Peppers album for me or not. I don't know, but I do think that this is a pretty good album. So yeah, so definitely check out Stadium Arcadium. It's really good. And so then we move on to I'm Wit You, and this was released in 2011. And unfortunately, we ended up getting yet another lineup change. We ended up getting John Frusciante ended up leaving the band, and we ended up getting Josh Klinghoffer, who was, I believe, like their guitar tech for like a really long time. So he wasn't like a stranger to the band or anything like that. But at the same time, yeah, the album does kind of suffer without Frusciante. I don't think Josh is a horrible guitar player by any means. I think he's a decent guitar player, but he's not really as great as Frusciante was. And I do think that's why this album isn't quite as good as any of their other ones, because they sort of lack that something that they had with Frusciante. But even with that said, like, I think the album, it really does have its moments. It has some pretty good songs on it. Like, Rain Dance Maggie is pretty good as well. The Adventures of Rain Dance Maggie. Brandon's Death Song is pretty good. Brendan's Death Song is pretty good. Look Around is a fun song. Monarchy of Roses is pretty good. Goodbye Hooray. Dance, Dance, Dance. It's just stuff like that. But at the same time, it's just okay. It's an okay album. It just lacks the spark that past Chili Peppers albums did. So I think it's an okay one. Sort of forgettable at times, honestly. Just not much to say about it. Just kind of, it's okay. And so then we move on to their latest album that just came out, The Getaway. And what this album, this was the first album since Mother's Milk to not have Rick Rubin on production. I mean, instead we have Danger Mouse producing this one. And when I first heard that Danger Mouse was going to produce it, I was just like, what? Like, I don't know. Like, it's sort of a strange decision, you know. And like I like Danger Mouse's production in general, but I don't really know if he was the right fit for the Chili Peppers. I mean, I do think that he does a decent job here, but I don't know. Like, I think that Rick Rubin was a better producer for the Chili Peppers. And this album, you know, at first when I first listened to it, I was like, you know what, it's not great, but honestly, like, you know, because comparing the lead singles to the album, it's better than I thought it was, because the lead singles that they released, it didn't really do much for me. Like, Dark Necessities was okay, then you got the Getaway, which was, I didn't think that was very good. I thought it was pretty weak. And then we got We Turn Red, which was pretty good, and it was probably the best like single that was released from that album. So with all of that, it was like a mixed bag. But when I was first listening to it, I was like, you know what, this is actually pretty decent. But honestly, looking back, you know, like a week ago, where I kind of like re-listening to the album, you know, and stuff like that, it was just like, you know, I don't know about this record. I don't know. Like, it's sort of, I guess I'd say it's on par with I'm With You, and that it's a decent album. But I don't know. Like, it's okay. Like, I will say this, that Dark Necessities, it has grown on me. Honestly, I don't think it's a great song, but I do think that it has grown on me. There's also it does have its moments, you know, like other Chili Peppers albums. It does have its moments. We Turn Red is a pretty good song. Sick Love is actually a really good song. It was co-written by Elton John and Bernie Taupin, who was co-written a ton of Elton John songs, and they co-wrote it with the Chili Peppers, and it also has Elton John on piano, and I think that's the best song on the entire album. It has a very Benny and the Jets kind of vibe to it, and it's a really good song. It's definitely the best on the album. And you have Go Robot, which is a bit disco-esque, you know, kind of song. Then you got Detroit, which is pretty good. The Hunter, which is like mainly like piano, I believe, if I remember that correctly. It's mainly like a really soft song with piano. And you got Dreams of a Samurai, which is pretty good, though it kind of goes on for a bit too long. So overall, I do think that it is a decent album, even though it is kind of forgettable. I don't know. Maybe the album will grow on me as I listen to it more and more, but it was okay. So that's all for the Red Hot Chili Peppers podcast. I do think that they've made more good albums than bad. Their recent ones haven't been so good, but I do think that they are a good band for the most part. I think I really like them. You know, I've always known the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I've always listened to them, and I'll always like them. So that's all for the Mailman podcast, and I will see you all next time.